Welcome back. Today we're going to do the break-in oil change on my Honda CRF250L. What you see in front of you is all the parts that you would need to do an oil change on this bike. The only exception would be you don't really need one of these. This is a magnetic oil drain plug, and I'm choosing to add this because they're generally a good idea. Other than that, you're going to need, by the book, 1.5 liters or 1.6 quarts of oil. So this is the oil that I will be using. You'll need a new oil filter. And then, again, by the book, you're going to need a new crush gasket for the oil filter cover. However, it seems to be 50-50 on whether or not this is needed based on the other videos I've seen on this subject. So I figure, they're cheap. I'll replace it now, and then I'll see if I need to replace it in the future. And I'll always try and have at least one in stock just in case. Torque values, just to get a good idea of these right away. 24 Newton meters for the drain plug. And then the manual is not very specific. In fact, it's very non-specific about the 4 bolts that join up the oil filter cover, and it just says tighten them. That doesn't really mean anything to me other than just get them tight. But looking through the table for other torque values, it seems like an M6 bolt, which I believe these are M6, are anywhere from 6 Newton meters to 10 Newton meters. So if you want a spec, it's going to be somewhere in that range. You can do your own research if you want something more specific than that. Otherwise, it doesn't seem to be that important according to Honda. So the next step is to warm up the motorcycle to get the oil hot so it comes out easier, and any metal particles get mixed into the oil and pulled out with the oil. So I will be removing the skid plate, warming the bike up by just doing some laps around the yard, and then I'll bring it back and drain it out. So let's head out to the shop. If you listen carefully, you can hear the engine ticking itself cool. So at this point, it's a good idea to now drain the oil. The socket for this is a 12 millimeter. Now we can just leave that draining for a couple minutes, and I will right the bike a few times to try and get as much out as possible. I'm not going to bother looking into the oil in the pan to see if there's any metal particles, simply because my oil pan is pretty dirty, and I think the oil filter will tell us a good enough story on it. At this point, I am satisfied enough with how much is drained out of the oil pan, and now I'm going to remove these 4 bolts for the oil filter cap. Another thing is it is important to clean up any dirt around the oil fill cap, as well as the oil filter cover and the oil drain plug. That way you don't chance getting any dirt or debris inside the oil system. Now it looks like they completely painted over this line after painting, or they painted it after they put it on there, which doesn't seem quite right, but I guess we'll see how it comes off. There is a spring behind this cover, so you do want to be careful that you don't have things go spring-a-springen all over the floor, never to be found again. All right, I see a few pieces of grit floating around in there. Not sure if you're going to be able to see them though. Now we can just pull this piece out, and I'm going to put it in this container here, and we will inspect that in just a moment. Last thing is to get this old gasket off. And thankfully they make these out of metal, so you don't have to go and try and peel off a paper one with a razor blade for an hour to get it clean enough not to leak. All right, another thing I want to do is, with a very clean cloth, wipe out inside of this pocket here where the oil filter sits, just to try and pick up anything else. Now, I didn't see any pieces of debris or particles in this portion, which is good. All right, we're going to leave that sit there for just a minute, and let's check out the oil filter. All right, let's take a look at the old oil filter and see if we can spot anything. Yeah, I see a lot of metal flakes, especially right there. I'm guessing this part was at the bottom, maybe? Or maybe it was at the top. Do you see them right there? I don't see any other ones. Just a whole bunch right in there. Some of those look blue. So it's caught some grit. They're pretty big chunks. I can't tell what it's caught. That's, you know, like microscopic stuff, obviously. So let's take a look at the new oil filter and make sure that it matches the old one so I can make sure I got the right part. Yeah, I'd say those are close enough to match to me. I shouldn't really make a comparison here because this one is about 3 times heavier than that one, but this one also is soaked with oil. Otherwise, the number of pleats, the K and N here seems pretty close. I will cut this one open to get an estimate on the surface area of this OEM factory filter, and I'll put that number down in the description. And then at the next oil change, we'll see how much is in a K and N by comparison. And then we can kind of get a comparison on the factory versus aftermarket. Let's take our new gasket, set that aside, and then make sure this O-ring portion goes in. And that should stick on there. And then we'll have this cleaned up housing. And it's pretty obvious this gasket only goes on one way. So use your brain. It's hard to mix it up. And then put the bolts back in. I'm going to take my 1/4-inch drive torque wrench here, and I'll set it at roughly 6 Newton meters, and I'll see how that feels for torque. I'll go up a little bit more, closer to 8, and I think that's where I'll keep it. This feels, plenty tight enough. All right, that works for me. I'm going to wipe the oily areas up, and then we'll put the drain plug back in. Something to note here is that this Tusk magnetic drain plug is a 14 millimeter, not a 12 millimeter head. That's not a huge deal because the Honda uses several other 14 millimeter bolts on the bike, so it's not like it's adding a whole new number. And remember, this bolt needs to be torqued to 24 foot-pounds. Sorry, 24 Newton meters or 18 foot-pounds, which is near the top of the range for this 3/8 drive torque wrench. That is not as tight as I thought it would be. And I'll do one final wipe up of the bottom of the engine, and then we can add the new stuff. All right, last part of the change here. Obviously, it's adding the oil. Remember, it only needs about 1.5 quarts. So I'm going to dump a full quart in and then add about 1/4 of a second one and see where that gets me. You got to understand though that because this oil is not as hot and it doesn't flow straight to the bottom right away, you will have to account that it'll end up being probably just a little bit higher than wherever you're setting it initially. I will start there. That's about 1.25 quarts. And we're just below the bottom line by the looks of it. The leaks you're seeing down there, if you see them splashing, I put some WD-40 in the frame. That way it prevents the inside of the frame from rusting out. It's a good preventative thing. So that leak is not corresponding to an engine oil leak. Just thought I'd mention that. Still down at the bottom of the glass. Or is it? Actually, it's right at the top of the fill line. Right, well, I don't know, it's about 1 millimeter below the upper line there. So I'm happy with that. I'm gonna keep it there, and then I will keep an eye on it for the first drive. Do not over tighten this here. Sorry, forgot to move the camera. Whatever you do, do not over tighten the fill cap, because if you do, you're gonna have a real awful time trying to get the rest of it out of there without getting a bunch of plastic chips in the engine. I do plan on swapping that out with a metal one at some point here in the near future, just because I don't want to have to deal with this potentially breaking. Even your boot could possibly break that off, or even any rock or something. It's best not to deal with that. So that's pretty much it. I don't think there's anything else to cover. Again, I'll put the surface area of the original filter in the description, and really that's all there is to it. This is not so much an instructional video, more as just doing an oil change on this thing for its break-in, because again, it's at 305 miles right now. So my next video, I will be doing the exhaust on this, because, well, now that it's out of break-in, I'm willing to do the exhaust part. And all the people who think that I did that video wrong will now get their answer. So until next time, see ya.